This morning, you should be concerned about atrophy. You should be concerned that things waste away. You should be concerned that your attitude or your perspective on life could be eaten at and you could drift. It's a concern because you have to work against it in order to float, in order to make progress. We're going to be in Colossians chapter 3, and as we work through some of these verses, I think you're going to see that God has a plan to keep you from atrophy. Here's what we're going to talk about this morning, that you need to learn to love life. You need to learn to love life, just like I do and every other person. And when Paul wrote this letter and he sent it to the Colossian church, they needed to learn to love life. It's true for every single one of us every single day. And the reality is that things will try to pull us away from that love. At first it seems simple. Of course I love life, but yet we get distracted and we start misidentifying what life really is, where we can find it, and how to live fully. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to kick things off with a story this morning about one of my best pranks. Okay? This is going to teach you to love life, all right? Back in the day, they used to have these things where a bunch of stores would be in one building. They called it a mall. And yeah, I know. And the kids would gather and fraternize, all sorts of things. And we would go to this mall, and one of my favorite times we did this, we're all gathered together. We would do this prank. It's called, like, I don't know what it's called, but the group staring prank. And what we'd do is we'd stand together, and we would all kind of just look up. And people walking by, they just, some of them don't even pay attention. They just go on. They're smarter than us. But other people, not so much. Other people will grab just a little bit of attention, and they'll, what is up there? And then they join the group. And what the perfect thing is, what you want to do is, as one person comes, one of the originals fades away. And so over time, what you end up is with a whole group of people who don't know what they're looking for. And they're just, I don't know. You were here before me. What? And it's just beautiful. And then you sit down in the food court and just watch. And that would be the idea. It's very difficult to actually pull off. But one day we're doing this, and we're about halfway there. We have some people coming in and out, and you're kind of like watching people, right? Because sometimes you can invite people or be like, hey, man, what is you? And so you want to keep an open eye. And I have this eye down the long kind of hallway deal. The guys come in, and there's this one dude, and he is on a mission, right? He's one of these guys, right? He is just going. He's got like a coupon to Jamba Juice or something. There's no slowing him down. He's on a mission, and I see him, and I'm like, all right, there's no way I'm stopping this guy. There's no way. But as you can tell, somebody walks like this. It's a passionate fella. And so he's passionate, and his curiosity gets inflamed when he sees the group. And so he looks at us, and he decides, I don't need to stop. I'll just keep walking, but I bet I can still see what they're looking at. So he's got his Jamba Juice coupon, and he's just walking, and he's looking like this, full speed, right into the food court. He just rails these two tables, and he falls over. There's a bunch of kids at the table, chicken fingers everywhere, a giant mess. And now all of us have something to look at, And so it works out in the long run. But this guy, he stands up, doesn't look at a soul, brushes off the chicken fingers, and just power walks right out of our life. Just keeps going. That was it. And it was one of the greatest days of my life. It was incredible. Now, I tell you that story for a couple reasons. First, I need to inspire that next generation of pranksters, all right? Get out there, change the world. I believe in you. But the other reason is to remind you of something that you already know, which is that staring becomes steering. That what captivates you will eventually control you. And even in just this tiny example, this power-walking individual, this powerful man, was captured in his attention, and it threw everything into a mess. Just for a moment, the focus that you need to have is so important. What Paul walks us through here, what we're going to see in this, is his first point, his sort of argument, brings out this idea that we need to focus on life. If you want to learn how to love life, this increasing fullness, this increasing growth, then you need to learn to focus on life. Focus on what real life is. Now, why would you need that reminder? Why would I need that reminder? Why would there be a church full of Christians in Colossae that would need to be reminded to focus on life? Well, it's pretty simple. There's a lot of shiny things out there. There's a lot of groups of people that will convince you to focus on things that don't matter. There's a lot of things that will pull from what actually brings you life. And over time, those little tugs, those little influences, and sometimes big ones, will begin to circulate your life around things that don't matter. And you atrophy away. And that's when you realize you don't really like the life you're living because you're not really living much of a life. What you're pursuing doesn't actually have much life in it. Paul points out that really for the Christian, for us, life is Jesus. That's where he begins in verse 1 of chapter 3. He says, "Since then you have been raised with Christ." This is going to be the foundation to his argument looking outward. He's going to be, because you have been raised, because the redemption of your heart is true, I have a really big important point for you. But I just need to pause for a second because that part needs to be true about us. Really, for the Christian, Jesus is life. When we become a Christian, when we're welcomed into the family of God, when that's a real thing, what this means is that we looked at God and said, I can't do this. The life that I'm trying to get, the thing that I'm pursuing, the hope or the joy that I have, I can't actually grab a hold of that. I need something else. And usually, it's circumstances lead us to understand that there's a breakdown in what I thought life would be. I thought this would bring me happiness, and it hasn't. I thought this would quell my heart, and it hasn't. I thought I would actually get peace from this, and it didn't. And in those moments where you truly understand the path you're walking is broken, then God interrupts and says, I have something better. And so someone explains to you, did you know that you can reach out to Jesus? And so you might have used different words. You might have asked for forgiveness. You might have said, God, I want to follow you or I trust you. But really, that call, in whatever language there you might have used, is a call to say, I'm going to look to Jesus for my life now. I trust that in him there is life, and these other places there isn't. And Paul is taking that for granted to these people he's writing. Since then, you have been raised with Christ. Since that is who you are now, your identity is that. Your life source is Jesus. I have a point. Now, I just need you to understand, though, what that means for you. If you are a Christian, if you stand in front of God, in those moments, he said, I see your wickedness, and I'm going to apply my son's righteousness to that. I see your death approaching, and I'm going to allow my son's resurrected life to be applied to that. I see the death penalty that you deserve, and I'm actually going to apply my son's death to that record. Since then, you have been raised. Listen, set your hearts on things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on earthly things. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. So here's this picture. Christians have been given life in Jesus. And so when we talk about focusing on life, what you end up doing is focusing on the thing that you think is going to bring you the most life. So some of us are straight running down paths that are broken. But I almost want to encourage you that if you truly believe that that's where you're going to find life, go for it. In my mind, it might even be better to speed up that breakdown. If you truly are rejecting Jesus and saying, that's not where life is, this is life over here, then good luck. What he's calling us to do here is to really picture our life source as Jesus. The place I get life from is Jesus. Jesus becomes central to me at that point. He becomes the most important characteristic about who I am. He becomes the most important thing, the most defining part of me. Listen, Jesus doesn't stay in the pickup, right? You guys know you go to Orscheln's, or what is it called now? Tractor, whatever. You go to Orscheln's, and the dog, it stays on the back of the pickup. And it'll be there when you get back, right? And you go again, you do your stuff, and you come back, and oh, there he is, and he's happy, and he licks your face. It's not the relationship we have with Jesus. He's not an addendum. He's not this additional thing. Jesus becomes the most important part about you. The fact that you've been forgiven is the single most important thing about you as a Christian. It's where your life is rooted. And he says you need to focus on this. You need to focus on this because if you don't, if you're not intentional, you drift. And this is what happens. If your focus in life drifts, really what will happen is your hope. That's where you feel it, I think. Primarily, your hope drifts. And this is all of us. Every single one of us in the room has a problem with this drifting. Where we will begin to look at other things and say, man, here is my hope. And then when that thing breaks down, it really honestly feels like your life is ending. It really does. You wanted things to go a certain way. You wanted them to turn out. You had hope that this thing would bring you life and bring you life in the full. And now it's failing you. And it feels like your life is ending. Right? And in some sense, we see this, right? And it's funny, right? Like the teenage breakup, right? I was youth pastor for a while. I think those are hilarious. I think they're so fun, you know? And why? Because on the outside, it's like such an obvious thing for us. It's like your life isn't over. They were kind of annoying anyway. This is fine, you know? But their hope was so wrapped up in that relationship that I can't imagine life without it. I can't imagine what it would be. That was my hope. And we're just as guilty. We're just as guilty as the dumb teenagers, right? We do it ourselves. Every one of us that we lean into these things, and then when they're taken away, it's like, I can't imagine how life is going to go without this. I thought this person would be here forever. I thought I wouldn't have to deal with this. I thought that this wouldn't hit me this way. I thought it would be easier or better, and now it's gone, and I don't know what to do. I just want to point out that I bet your hope has drifted into something it shouldn't belong in because you focused this thing as your life. Focus on life. There's a missing puzzle piece. And we try to fill it with these other things, but it has to be strong enough. It has to be strong enough to carry that hope and to lean on in faith. It has to sort of complete this picture of your life, this puzzle piece, and you're like, I don't know exactly what'll fit here, so we shove things in there to try to, and when they don't work, it's so debilitating. It's so debilitating. The Christian hope is interesting. The answer that we see here in scriptures for that problem, it might take you by surprise. Because when I first read it, it felt a little random to me. I'll be honest. Listen to verse 4. He says, when Christ, who is your life, appears, then you will also appear with him in glory. And I just thought that was interesting. He's telling us how to live and to set our minds on these things and to set our hearts in this direction. And then he says, but when Christ, who is your life, appears, you'll also appear with him in glory. And I'm like, why are we talking about this now? But I think it's this piece of hope. Now, if you're not a Christian or if maybe you don't buy into this, maybe you're not even a person of faith, the idea here sounds a little cheesy. It just does. It sounds like a little too fantastical that Jesus is going to appear and we're going to be glorified. And like it sounds a little, but I just want to challenge you that I think every good part of life sounds cheesy when you tell other people about it. It's true. Just think of your best memories and try to describe it to somebody. And then we went for a walk and there was a sunset and everybody's like, yeah, I guess you had to be there. Like it just doesn't sound. And that's a little bit what this is. But what we do know is that it makes sense. It does make sense as the ending, that it's hopeful and it's kind and it's the happily ever after that fixes this. See, the Christian hope is the focus of our life being driven forward by something we know is secure. Because no matter how broken the world gets, Jesus coming back will fix it. And no matter what's taken from you or what's inflicted upon you, there's hope in Jesus. That when he returns, this thing is going to be fixed. And I can't describe to you exactly the way he's going to do it because he hasn't told me. I can't exactly describe to you how this will unfold because I'm not sure. But what I can do is just like that missing puzzle piece, I can kind of describe to you what it should do based on what we do know. Based on the picture that isn't fully complete, I can tell you that this picture of life is uninterrupted. There's no atrophy. It's unencumbered. That it's a story of fullness and of beauty, and it's something so simple and perfect that all these complexities that we wrestle with are answered. This fullness is a hope that won't let us down. It's a faith that's strong. And the more you understand it, the more it draws you in. It's like stars in the sky. The more you see, the more there is. The further you go, the greater it is. The more you realize how much there is, the more you realize how much you don't know there is, and it expands and it's beyond. And you look and it just goes further. There's more beauty. There's more to unlock. So you focus on life to learn to love the life that you have. To learn to love life as it's designed to be. Where is Jesus? What is he doing right now? What does he say about this? You focus on Jesus, and this is what naturally happens. Your eyes go upward. Your eyes go upward. Your hope is in heaven. Your heart is set on things that are above. It's a natural consequence of centralizing Jesus. Inevitably, it overflows into the rest of the way you live. Right? That's where Paul goes with this. He says, you need to learn to love life. That's where we started. And in order to do that, you focus on life, but there's the flip side of that coin where he tells us that we're going to need to fight off death. Look at verse 5. Colossians 3:5, it says, put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature. Sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. I find this really interesting, but I want you to notice some of these contrasts that Paul's pulling out. Paul tells us that we need to fight off death, and he starts talking about death and life, earth and heaven. There's this obvious two ways. There's an obvious differentiation, and he gives us this list, and really it's a list of death. You read through that verse 5, it's a list of death. That's what it is, it's sin. This concept of sin really is not a guilt maneuver. This concept of sin is an explanation of how life breaks down. Sin separates us from God. So God designs things to work a certain way, that they're orderly, that they have purpose and design, that there isn't breakdown. And when we sin, and when sin disrupts the world, it destroys that. It takes what is good and it twists it, and it manipulates it, and it breaks it. And death enters. That's where death comes from. This list tells us not only is there just a concept of death, but actually that death is inside us. We have this earthly thing, this nature that doesn't belong in us, and yet it's the condemnation of death in us. God says, you're not supposed to carry that around. That's not supposed to be in there. There's this cancerous, idolatrous death in our hearts. That's our problem. You know what you do with cancer? You kill it. You kill it. Now, I don't know how much experience you have with cancer. I hope none. But the way chemotherapy works, which is one of the most standard treatments, is that it uses what's called cytotoxins, which would be basically poison. It's designed to kill cells, right? Now, this is a very rudimentary understanding, but the idea is that if you are full of cancer and you go to the doctor, they'll look at that cancer inside of you and say, in order to kill that, we need to poison you. We're going to poison you because the fastest growing thing in you is death. It's kind of almost seems counterintuitive, but chemo is killing you slower than the cancer is killing you. But it's killing the cancer faster than the cancer is killing you. And that's the equation you have to live in with chemotherapy. We're going to try to kill this cancer that's spreading so rapidly by poisoning it. But at the same time, we need to pull back enough that we don't poison you first. What if the best, most efficient treatment to kill off the death that's in your heart felt like poison to you? What if God, in all his wisdom, knew that in order to give you the life that you so desperately need, that you're designed to have, he would need to drain you of the strength that you thought was enough? What if it had to hurt? That sin, that habit, that struggle, that it's not skin deep. The skin treatment won't work. It's a heart issue because at the core, he defines it. He says all these things. He says sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, which is greed. He defines these. Idolatry. There's all these things internally. Did you notice that? These are things that I can have my evil desires. I can have my lust. I can have my impurities. And they're in here. And look, they're not affecting everybody. He says there's still death. And when you look really closely, it's idolatry. Every single one of those is just worshiping something that isn't God. It's worshiping sex. It's worshiping pleasure. It's worshiping power or escapism or yourself or something else. I'm going to lift this up as the greatest good, the thing that should control me. But here's the deal. It's going to resurface again and again until it's gone. It says, fight off death. It's a kind of a serious reality because look at verse 6. Look at verse 6. This is what he says. Because of these, talking about those things, all that idolatrous cancer, the wrath of God is coming. The wrath of God is coming. That's a real thing. The wrath of God is coming. The idolatry deserves this. In order to get rid of it, the chemo wrath of God needs to be set free upon the cancerous idolatry. That's the only way to do this. Bigger problem is not just that there are sick people. This is not a story about God seeing all these people who are sick and are broken and saying, unbelievable. I cannot imagine why you would bring that to me. The wrath comes because there's people who love the sickness and they nurture it and they propagate it and they say, this is good, this is right. Everybody should have this cancer. This is the best way to do it. And so people are championing sin. Team Satan is lifting up this cancer saying, this is what is best. Worship this. Look how fast it grows. Isn't it great? God steps in and decides to be very clear what this death deserves. It deserves death. And what we need to do is we need to be careful because we can actually start to get angry about those other people. People who are sick and then they're living in that sickness and then they're championing it. We can get angry. We read the headlines, right? And it feels like that side is winning. Or, oh, look what these people got away with. And it actually can stir up these feelings of just angst. And I wish this would, and we get angry at them. But we have this nice cold slap. This reminder in verse 7 where he says this, you used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived. See, it's really fascinating that as Christians, we recognize that we're saved from death, but then some people actually struggle to recognize that the people who are still wrestling with death out there, it's just you a few minutes ago. That's where you came from. That's where all of us started. Nobody who's cancer-free walks past a cancer ward and says, can't believe you suckers are still in there doing that. That's ridiculous. You should be more like me, cancer-free. That's not it. That's not it. You have to understand that we say the old trite thing, right? Like, hate the sin, love the sinner. Where's that come from? It comes from this verse. It comes from understanding that you had the deathly sickness and you loved that death just as much as anybody else did. And you got rescued, you got saved, you got healed, not because of what you did, but because God was merciful. God was kind to you. You fight off this death. You fight off this urge to judge other people who wrestled with the same death you do. It's a part of learning to love life. Really think about it. Why would you hate cancer so much? Because you love life. Because you know how valuable and great and perfect life is designed to be. Turns out that those issues, those heart issues, overflow. The death that's deep down in there, it comes out. So look at verse 8 and 9. He says this, but now you must also rid yourselves of all such of these things as anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off the old self with its practices. He says we need to fight off death. You need to fight it off. Now, you might hear these verses and hear a list. I just want to challenge you with that. You and I need to learn to read the Bible in a less like a manual that's for your brake lines, okay? More like an invitation. An invitation into a life that's designed for you to succeed. Come be a part of this. It doesn't have to be like that. What if you were to live this way? What if you had this? This is real life. This isn't a list from an angry boss. It's an invitation. There's a vision here of what your life could be. What would it be like if you were the person who would bring more life into people's lives than take away from it? What would it be like if you didn't have the anger? Who would you be without the rage? Who would you be without the bitterness, without all this malice, without the meanness, without the slander that comes out? Who would you be if you didn't have that negative speech overflowing all the time? There's a vision of you. There's a vision for you without the rags and the scars and the fake armor that you use to protect yourself. There's a vision of who you are in Christ. There's a vision. It's not clinging to those old things anymore. That's not life. You move on from that. And the question just becomes how? None of us want to be wrestling with those things, right? None of us want to be stuck. How do we actually do this? He says you need to take off this old man. Now, let me paint a picture for you, all right? If you're new in Christ, if you're a new Christian or like this thing is new and your things are starting to click, there's some changes that you walk through and you see like pretty much immediate growth. It's like this greenhouse season where you're just like, boom, growing. You change this. You're like, I'm going to take away some of these influences that I'm realizing are really bad. I'm going to replace them with these really great influences. Growth. You're like, oh, I'm gonna balance my life out in a more godly way. Growth. I'm going to centralize some things like being with God's people and being encouraged and being vulnerable when I need help. Boom, growth. And as you walk that, it's super encouraging and it feels great and there's just life and you're seeing new things. But then you kind of get tripped up because sin just kind of pops up again. And you're like, this is weird. I kind of didn't think I'd have to deal with this. Kind of thought I was over this part. And so you start to do what you know. Well, maybe if I just add another chapter a day. Maybe if I just try a little harder. Maybe if I add just a few more steps here and there. Maybe I'll just add a few more bricks to this kind of wall I'm building that just kind of protect out. You want it to be easy. You want it to be just like it was. But that's not always how chemotherapy works. Sometimes those first easy steps are joyful and easy, and they maybe convince you that the next steps, which are joyful and hard, shouldn't be that way. That's not true. The vision for us, the vision to really change who we are, means God needs to go down through the layers. And ripping some of those off hurts a lot. There are things that we need to deal with that you have maybe gone your entire life training yourself to avoid. There are places in your heart where that sin is rooted down, that cancerous idolatry is down in there, and in order to really walk closer with God, Jesus says, I need to poison that. I need to give you some hard truth, and I need you to sit with it, and I need it to just seep in. And it's going to hurt. But it's what's right. And it's what's good. You have to fight off this death. Our frustration, I'll just try a little harder. But what happens is you build those walls, and you build them to keep sin out, but what ends up happening is they kind of double as a prison for you. Right? I won't do this, and I won't do that, and I'll try this harder, and I won't. And then pretty soon, you're just kind of overwhelmed with this sense of guilt and shame because I can't let anybody in. They'll see how bad it is in here. I can't do that. And I certainly can't crawl out because I've been trying. And every single brick of like, this won't happen again, God, I swear. Every single day of like, no, not this time. This is the last time. Every one of those stacks up, and you end up isolating yourself in your own frustration. Why? Because when we talk about taking off our old man, taking off this old self, you're going to try to do it yourself. You're going to try to do it in your own power, in your own effort, and not by the faith that you're invited to live in here. So he says, fight off death, you have to kill it. But look at what it says in verse 9 and 10. Since you have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge of the image of its creator. Now I'm going to unfold this because it's a little bit wordy there. But you take this off and you're putting this new way on. You're a new person. You're not controlled by that death. That's not the most important thing in your life anymore. Instead now, your focus is on Jesus because he's your life. And as you fight off death, you're learning how precious that life is every day. And you're learning to love life. That's the invitation. This morning, you're invited to learn to love life in ways that maybe life has always been exhausting to you. You're invited to learn to love life because you realize that the center of it is Jesus. And he says, this is what it's like to be the Christian. You're being renewed in the knowledge of the image of your Creator. You're being made new. Let's take it piece by piece. You're being made new, renewed. And I need to ask you if you believe that. Like, that's the first thing. Do you actually think God is changing you? That he's renewing you? And specifically, like all of you, that God is actively working to renew every bit of you. That your spiritual weakness, and you're being renewed. That in your frailty of physicality, you're being renewed. That in the struggles of your sexuality, you're being renewed. That in the trauma of your emotional life, you're being renewed. God's gospel, the good news here is that God can renew you and cause a new sun to shine on a new day for you. You're invited to that kind of life. You're invited into that sort of existence. And he says it comes from this knowledge of knowing who he is. That Christ is the image of the invisible God, that he's the perfect representation, that he's everything we need to know. And it says the more you know him, the knowledge of him, it changes you. You can walk with him and you can strive to design your life around knowing him more. And what happens is you spend the rest of your life learning how who he is reveals who you are. There's a new life of freedom and joy that unfolds at the rate you discover how precious Jesus is. I'm going to say that again. There is a new life of freedom and joy that unfolds at the rate of you discovering how precious Jesus is. If you pursue him to actually know who he is, the starry sky unfolds and there's just more life and more beauty. And I have to ask, what are you trying to spend your life to discover? What is this thing that you're looking at? Where are you looking to give you life? Look at this. Listen to this last verse, verse 11. Here, talking about in this new life, there's no Gentile or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. Christ is all and is in all. In other words, you could say Christ is over all. He's everything, and the reason Christ is your everything is because he's your life. He's where you pull life from. He says, learn to love life, because what you're doing is you're learning to walk with Jesus closer. You're learning to know him more, and it's changing you. It's opening up your ability to truly be who you are, who you've been designed to be. Jesus is not distant. I don't know if you feel that he is. Jesus is not unreachable. He's waiting for us to discover the next wave of joy, the next closer communion with him. All of these things try to steal our focus away. They say, well, I'll find life over here and what I've done or what's been given to me or what's been accomplished in my life. That's where I'm going to find life and value and identity. That's who I am. He says, none of that matters. It doesn't matter your skin color or the economics or the political distinction or the family background or the religious accomplishments. What does that give? That doesn't give life. There's nothing there for life. He says, do you know Jesus? Do you know Jesus? Do you know him more today than you did a year ago? Are you willing to know him? Are you willing to walk toward him? Like, are you willing to sit down and undergo the painful chemo to kill what you know is killing you? He's worth it. That will unlock the love of life. You'll learn to love life because you'll learn to know that Jesus is your life. Jesus is walking with you. You focus on Jesus and you fight off the death and you see the deeper person of Jesus more and more. And it unlocks things for you. It heals things for you. You'll discover who he's designed you to be. You'll discover the most precious things in life. You'll learn to love life. In a moment, we're going to see some people stand up here and be baptized. And think about this. Back in verse 1, he says, just as you were raised with Christ, right? That's this picture of baptism. That we're raising out of the water. That the old man is dead. The old person, that's not me anymore. This is who I am now. I'm new. I'm this new person. Jesus is my life. Jesus has changed me. I'm ready to walk closer to him. I'm ready to walk with him. And so here's what's going to happen. When they come up and they're sharing their stories, I want you to listen with an open heart. I want you to listen about how God's love has changed them. Because everybody's story with Jesus is different, but everybody's story with Jesus is the same. It's that verse just a couple minutes ago, that we're renewed in the image of the knowledge of our Creator. That what happened was I realized that I'm not who I'm supposed to be, and Jesus is going to save me. That I'm going to be renewed by who he is because I need it. And that's everybody's story. I want you to listen with an open heart to these stories of redemption, and this is why. Because Jesus is inviting you to walk closer with him. Jesus is inviting you. And so if you feel, especially during this time, you're hearing the testimony, you're hearing about what God has done, I'm going to ask that you pray. In that moment, I want you to pray and ask God to change you. Ask God to walk deeper with you. Ask him to kill the death. Ask him for the chemotherapy you need. Ask him to walk through the hard things with you. Listen to his answer.